Imagine you're at the movies. The main character in the movie dies, and there's a collective gasp around you. Two people are whispering on your right side, and someone is asking questions about the director on your left. You hear a clunk and see the girl next to you slide off her second shoe. It smells like compost bins and athlete's foot. The boy behind you is chewing popcorn. You can hear incessant crunching as he bites and his lips smacking right before he swallows. You receive a text, and your phone vibrates. Three girls wearing matching neon outfits shuffle in and sit in front of you. A phone rings. It would be hard to concentrate on the movie, wouldn't it? According to the National Autistic Society, this is how people with autism feel most of the time.
I think that, if they understood more of this, I think some of the puzzle pieces will more, they'd fall into place.
Autism is a developmental disorder that impairs a person's ability to socially interact, communicate, and behave typically. It is a spectrum disorder, which means that each person's diagnosis differs depending on the severity. A person with ASD does not look different, but they may behave, interact, or learn differently than someone who is neurotypical. There are 5 disorders included in the spectrum: Asperger's syndrome, autistic disorder, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, Rett's disorder, and child disintegrative disorder. The most obvious symptom of someone who has ASD is their social awkwardness and inability to connect.
It takes me longer to get comfortable in a social situation because it takes me longer to figure it out.
People with autism don't read those social cues, and so they may do things in an environment that doesn't seem appropriate, and it offends people, or it upsets people, or it makes people laugh at them and people just think they're weird.
Now, there's 2 or 3 ways a family can learn about autism. For some, it will be obvious right from the first months of life. They will know something's not quite right. The professionals will be reassuring them and saying, no, it's just boys are slower, because most of them are boys. But gradually it becomes clearer, and finally the professionals are convinced.
The only way to diagnose it is with behavioral observation. There is no medical test of any kind. You can't do a genetic test and see if a person has autism, and you can't do a spit test or a urine test or a blood test. You also can't do anything like an MRI. There's nothing in the brain that would tell you that this is the brain of an autistic person, and this is a brain of a typical person. Earlier treatment seems to get the best results because kids haven't fallen too far behind, because the brain is developing very rapidly, because some skills are still present in early life, in the first and second years, and you can build on skills that they have more easily than you can create skills that aren't there.
Before we even knew he had Asperger's, he's always been very sensitive, especially to noise. When we took him to the movies, there have been a couple of instances where there would just be a loud noise, whether it was a crash or something happy. It didn't necessarily have to be some tragedy, but he would just start crying, and we didn't really understand why. We just thought he was just a sensitive little baby.
Because these kids are going through, I think, a neurological nightmare every single day. They're taking in way more input than we are. They're having to try to function in a world that's not built for them.
But really, everyday life is very hard. The kids can be very rigid. Routines have to be followed religiously. They can be very picky about food, only eating orange foods, having to have things separate on the plate. Food can't touch each other, that kind. Managing food can be very, very difficult. Easily upset when routines break down. So life is quite a challenge, and the extraordinary thing is the families do this.
It's very stressful for parents and for family members, for siblings who often don't really get it. Sometimes younger and older siblings are asked to step in and help out. Maybe the most stressful thing for parents, something that I hear all the time, is that parents say, what happens when I can't take care of this person anymore?
back then when he was young, I still felt like maybe there was a chance that he was going to end up being normal someday.
You know, this is a lifelong issue for the youngsters themselves. It doesn't go away when they don't grow out of it, you know, and you know, they go through ups and downs.
It's not about empathy and feeling sorry for them. It's just really about understanding where they're coming from, I think, and finding the value in them as individuals, finding their skills and their gifts, because everyone that I've met, autism spectrum, PDD, NOS, these kids and adults have incredible gifts.
About 78% of people ages 6 to 21 who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder attend public schools. Although the needs of students diagnosed with ASD vary, most of them require special accommodations. Schools support students with ASD through either 504 plans or individualized education plans, IEPs. Both 504 plans and IEPs are free services provided for students in public schools.
IEP means that you cannot pass your classes at an average rate or better. So you can't earn C's in your classes because of one of these 13 diagnosed conditions. And that the testing that we do shows that you need special education, so you need specialized instruction to be able to access the curriculum. It might be that the passing periods in the hallways are too crowded and overwhelming because people with autism spectrum disorder have some issues with social interactions as well as with sensory processing. So things are really loud and it makes them feel very uncomfortable, and so the hallways may be too stimulating during passing periods.
Some students with high-functioning autism or Asperger's syndrome may spend the entire school day in a regular classroom. While this can be beneficial for both the autistic and neurotypical students, it can burden classroom teachers who often do not have the necessary training to support students with ASD. Parents, teachers, and administrators argue about whether students with autism should be mainstreamed or placed in special education classrooms.
They just didn't really know what to do. And so he spent 2 years, I think, developing behaviors because of how badly his case was handled. Some of them may have been there anyway, but I do feel that those 2 years without the proper support created behaviors that he may not have ever had.
And I'm not very keen on people being put all together, even though sometimes we do that because it's administratively convenient. You know, if somebody needs a lot of intensive staff support, it's easier if we congregate people. But that's our choice. It's not often theirs.
We as service providers or as people who are, we call typical, neurotypical, people say, oh, that's so sad, they're always alone, they must be lonely. But we don't have the brains wired like people with autism do. Their brains are wired very differently, and it's very stressful for people with autism to be around other people because they don't understand all the social things that are going on.
A lot depends on the characteristics of the child that you're talking about. You know, a very high-functioning child can thrive in a mainstream classroom. Sometimes they still need a special, they need the support of an aide to be there to just help them with challenges that come up during the day. But that's really expensive.
There is a lot of issue around funding. So even if the people that are working in the school the public school setting know what your child needs, there's a barrier to it because the funding isn't there. And I think there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of preparing both the regular general education teachers and the support staff that are there to help the kids with autism to make that option succeed for kids. But it didn't work for my son. It was a really traumatic, difficult 2 years, and it had to get really, really bad in order for the schools to agree that he needed a different setting.
You know, most of the youngsters themselves will find difficult to make friends and contacts with other people, and they don't necessarily want to hang out with other people with autism. Okay, we put them together.
As he got older and older, his differences became more aware, more visible to other children, and he at this point still hasn't had any real friendships, and that's one of the huge areas of autism, a real difficulty relating especially to their peers as children.
It's one of the things I would like to see much more as a buddying type schemes, whereby you develop, pairing sort of relationships between pupils who don't have autism, pupils with autism.
We have a club on campus called PALS, Partners at Lunch, where the special ed students are matched up with 3 or 4 more typical peers, and they meet once a week. It helps everybody. It's really cool to see, like kids taking my students out to lunch to Red Hill, or, we have kids that will be their friends with them 5 years later and they'll come to see them. Like, that stuff is really cool. It's really nice to see that.
The root of bullying is ignorance or unawareness of differences and of perspective taking.
I think, like for everyone really, finding an activity that you can do together and enjoy, and the communication can take care of itself.
I don't think that we need to treat people with autism as if they're severely handicapped. I like, starting, there's a catchphrase out there to presume competence, and assume that the person you're talking to is just like you, and then make subtle adjustments as you go.
If you know that someone is on the spectrum, one of the things you can do is ask someone who knows them what they like. They tend to be obsessed with stuff.
People, if they don't really know how to deal with someone with Asperger's, definitely learn more about it.